So welcome everyone. Once again, my name's Tom Stone. I'm a senior research analyst here at I4CP. Great to see so many of you joining us. We've got a great guest today, but as always, I'm going to start things off with just a few background bits of information, some reminders. If you're new to I4CP, and I recognize some new names and faces here on the call today, we're an HR and human capital research and peer connection firm. We discover the people practices that truly drive high performance. What do we mean by high performance? Those organizations that excel at revenue growth, market share, profitability, and customer satisfaction over a several five-year period. And in particular, we like to look for in all of our research studies for best practices, but what especially we like to call next practices. Those are those practices that high-performing organizations do more than low, but that aren't widely performed yet overall. We like to call those out. A lot of organizations do best practices that correlate to high performance, but it's those ones that are a little bit more rare that maybe we can help you see around the curve as to what's coming and what you should be thinking about. We are a member-based organization. You see here just a small sample of our several hundreds of great member organizations. We've got members across all different market industries and verticals. We have some members that are only a couple thousand employees, and we have others that are hundreds and hundreds of thousands, like Accenture and Amazon and so on. So we've got a nice blend of members here. If you're interested in membership, if you've been attending some of these calls and getting value from them, there's a lot more that you're missing out on by not being a member. So do reach out to I4CP. Really, anyone on the team could get you connected to the right people to have that conversation. A lot of our research is held back only, of course, and provided only to members. A lot of our tools and checklists, and a lot of our events, frankly, too. We've got exchanges, boards, and flash calls that are all member only. Again, my name's Tom Stone. I'm a senior research analyst here, and I want to first introduce Kevin Oakes, our CEO and co-founder, my co-host here. Hi, Kevin.
Hey, Tom. Good to be here.
Good to see you as always. And as you can see on the left, we've got an outstanding guest that we'll be introducing in just a moment. But I want to just run through a few other things about some upcoming events. So as we said, this is a bi-weekly series called Getting Hybrid Work Right. I know many of you have been attending, and we appreciate that. So the next one, given that today is the 9th, will be on June 23rd. But on alternating weeks, we have another series called the Next Practices Monthly Series. And these are more focused on different areas of HR. So as you can see, coming up next Thursday, same time, by the way, 11 a.m. Eastern and 8 a.m. Pacific, will be focused on talent acquisition practices, where we're going to have Danielle Monahan from Google, so an outstanding leader there, as our special guest. And then coming up on the 30th, we've got Lisa Manzoni, Strategic HR Next Practices Series. She's the Senior Vice President of Human Relations at McCormick. And if you do much cooking, you're very familiar with McCormick spices, of course. But I'd like to ask Kevin to say a little bit about a special event we've got coming up on June 29th about our most recent study, the Talent Imperative. Tell us a little bit about that, Kevin.
Well, the Talent Imperative, Tom, is a study that we did in cooperation with Fortune magazine. And we looked at a variety of aspects of the Great Resignation and how companies are really looking at skills and talent going forward. So Ellen McGirt, who's a very senior executive at Fortune, will be doing that webinar with me, and we'll be revealing the findings publicly that we came up with in this particular study.
Yeah, outstanding. I know we had a member-only webinar a couple of weeks ago. They, of course, get the findings first, but that'll be exciting to reveal some of those key findings more publicly, and to be able to do so in partnership with Fortune is great. The other thing I wanted to note event-wise before we introduce our guest for today is our in-person conference. It's actually both in-person and virtual now, given all the changes the world has gone through over the past few years, but it'll once again be held in March in Scottsdale, Arizona at the lovely Fairmont Resort that you see here. It's called our Next Practices Now Conference. We have a great lineup every year of top flight HR thought leaders, executives, book authors, and so on. We highlight a lot of our member organizations and some of the best and next practices that they're performing at this conference. It's about 300 to 500 people that attend, which isn't huge compared to, say, SHRM or AT&T conferences, but that's in part by choice. We have it at a very high level, mostly CHROs and chief learning officers, chief diversity officers, and so on. And it also doesn't have an expo. There's no sponsors of this event. So there's no vendors, no consultants hitting you up in the hallways or anything like that. It's exclusively for HR leaders. So excited to have this again. I've been to it the past 3 or 4 times. Of course, we had a hiatus there for a couple years for the pandemic, but we were excited to be back there in this past March, had a great event, and we're looking forward to doing it again next year. Kevin, I know we haven't announced any of the speakers yet for this one next year, but do you have a sense for when we might start doing that?
Yeah, in a couple months' time, we've got a number of speakers already lined up, but we want the anticipation to build, so we'll be announcing them in a couple months.
Very good. Well, I know based on previous years that there'll be some really outstanding speakers in that lineup, as there always is. All right, well, without any further ado, I'm going to turn things over to you, Kevin, to introduce our guest and lead the conversation. I will be monitoring the chat as I always do, and I encourage folks to chime in on the chat or raise your hand if you'd like to come off mute, but certainly use the chat and ask questions, make comments, and let's try and make this a dialogue.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Tom. And it's my pleasure to introduce Richard Stone, who's the VP of HR at Mondelēz International, which is a company that I'm sure everybody is familiar with in one way or another, but maybe the name of the company isn't quite as familiar to you. Richard, welcome. I know you're calling in from Chicago.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, thrilled to be with you today.
Well, Richard, let's do a little bit of intro to you first. You've got over 20 years of HR experience. You've worked at a couple of different food companies now, Kraft, before Mondelēz. So tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I'd love to hear a little bit more about the company as well.
Yeah, certainly, Kevin. So say great to be with you all. So Richard Stone, no relation to Tom, I don't think, right, Tom? But No, and there's a very casual photograph here of me with my sunglasses. But yeah, so I'm Richard. I've sort of been in the HR profession for over 20 years, as you say, Kevin. As you can probably tell from the accent, I'm originally from the UK. So I actually joined Kraft Foods in the UK back in 2001. That was a graduate rotation program. Most of my career, I've been in what was sort of generalist HR roles, sort of business, but then sort of shifted into sort of business partnering positions, and also had some COE experience, particularly in sort of the space of talent. Yeah, I've been fortunate enough to sort of see different parts of the globe. I joined Kraft in the UK. I then moved to Switzerland, where we were creating our new European HQ and operating model. Actually, Kraft split and became sort of 2 companies, so Mondelēz and then Kraft Foods Group, and then later Kraft merged with Heinz. Mondelēz is the snacks organization. So, you know, I then part of Mondelēz, I then sort of moved to Singapore. I was in a variety of different roles, sort of supporting Asia Pacific and Middle East Africa. Mostly, I say, in the business partnering space, but I was also the talent lead for EMEA for a period of time, and then relocated to Chicago last year. So my role now, as you see here, is head of people as it comes to enabling functions. So that is digital services. So that's all our tech plus shared service, business service. It's finance, so working with our CFO, Lucas Aramella, and it's corporate and legal affairs. So that's a little bit about me, and then the company. And great to see that some know the products, which is fab. I see Toblerone there, which is one of my faves. So Mondelēz, yeah, we're a snacks company. So we're actually the world's biggest biscuit company, and we're number 2 in chocolate. But actually, we're growing faster than the number 1. So we hope to be number 1 very soon. And I think many of you will know our brands. So in the chocolate space, again, we have some great global brands as well as local brands. So brands like Cadbury, which are huge in places like, you know, UK, India, Australia, Canada, parts of Southeast Asia. You know, we have brands in chocolate such as Milka, which is huge in Europe, Toblerone, which is quite a global brand. In biscuits, Oreo is the biggie that most know, as well as brands like Ritz, you know, Chips Ahoy. And we also have a big candy and gum business. So candy, you know, Sour Patch is one of the brands we have, and gum, Trident, Stride, depending on which parts of the world. And Enjoy Life. Thank you, Kelly. Yes, Enjoy Life as well is part of the Mondelēz family.
That's great. Yeah, and there's even more brands that I'm sure people are familiar with. So if you want to check out some of the brands, just go out to the website. Um, well, Tom, I'm sure many of those brands were probably very popular over the last couple of years during the pandemic. But I'd love to hear a little bit about how work has changed for you over the last couple of years and what your approach has been to hybrid and flexible work at your varied employee populations. You've got a lot of different types of employees inside the organization.
Yeah, absolutely, Kevin. So, I mean, a few comments to your point. Firstly, we do have a very diverse employee base. So we are a food manufacturer. So we have a huge sort of frontline manufacturing organization. And we have a large frontline sales organization. So as we think about hybrid and ways of working, I mean, this is a huge part of our population where these colleagues are, in plants with customers day in, day out. So as we think about impact of COVID and how that forced us to all sort of think and work differently, it was a different reality for many of our frontline workers. And, a huge amount of sort of focus we put as an organization clear around prioritizing safety, the right protocols, but also how do we make some shifts around sort of technology, sort of ways of working, capability, upskilling. So frontline is a huge part of our business. Of course, we have a big office-based population. And what I would say is many of the trends we saw, accelerated through COVID existed prior to COVID, right? I mean, I think all of us in one way, or many of us in one way or another, were looking at flexibility and flexible working. And we as a business, for sure, were supporting flexibility. I think obviously COVID sort of forced that for all of us. And I know there have been many conversations as part of these forums, so that's clearly not new. But, we as a business actually performed incredibly well during that sort of real everybody working from home from an office perspective and being virtual. I mean, certainly as a business, the fact that we're food and essential to life clearly helps. But I think what we did do well, and again, we learned and we struggled, to say is how we supported colleagues in terms of being virtual from an office perspective, or, and the kinds of sort of tools and support and how do we engage. So that was a huge focus, I would say, for us, Kevin. I mean, what you'll see here, I don't think there's any great surprises. I think as many of us are thinking about return to what is a, office or a new normal and way of working. As I say, a big part of our population never left frontline. And again, we have a big manufacturing footprint globally, and we had different experiences in terms of lockdowns and restrictions, places like the Philippines, which were in lockdown for over a year, and some of the world's longest lockdowns. Then we have obviously colleagues who, once offices are open, and keen to get back fully, because for a variety of reasons, which are both personal and professional, kinds of jobs they're in, or their personal circumstance at home. But a big focus for us has been about flexibility and working flexibly. So from a global perspective, we've really talked about, flexible working and hybrid being our new norm. And a lot of the messages and our sort of key positioning has been around how do we equip our line leaders, our managers, to really own those conversations with their teams versus mandating returns and numbers of days or percentages. So we've had a lot of conversations on that over the last, I'd say, year. I think we're figuring it through. We're learning our way, like many organizations are. But that view around how do we build capability in our managers to manage those conversations? Because let's be clear, talent expect flexibility, right? And again, we understand that can be different depending on the nature of the organization, right? Frontline manufacturing, sales, it is different. For roles that can sit anywhere, again, to attract, retain the best talent, that's absolutely critical, and especially in markets like the US, where it's, I think, really unprecedented, unique times in terms of talent, labor shortages. So yeah, we've sort of been leaning into that, I'd say, Kevin, in terms of our core focus. And then we do have, of course, and seeing more colleagues who are fully remote, right? Colleagues that are not, attached to an office. And again, we do have sort of a process that we go through in terms of determining how that makes sense, because, I do want to call out for, we do believe in the power of people being together. We do believe in the power of sort of when I say office space, but colleagues collaborating, connecting, celebrating in terms of our culture at Mondelēz. So as we've talked about, the emphasis of the role of managers, that's been an important message. Again, how do we get colleagues back together, interacting in a way, again, which gives flexibility, but continues to sort of, build on our sort of culture, if I put it that way.
Well, I'm glad we brought this slide up because I wanted to hone in on the manager side of the equation here. And this is something that when we were prepping for this call, we talked quite a bit about your approach to hybrid work was to emphasize empowering managers, something our research has been emphasizing as well, as you well know, Richard. Tell us a little bit more about how you approached this with managers and made them the role models here for hybrid.
Yeah, for sure, Kevin. Again, I'd say it's a journey and a lot we're sort of working through right now. We did have discussions at the most senior level, including with our CEO, Dirk, around what is our position as it sort of comes to hybrid and what is the role of the office, flexible working, remote, etc. But we anchored very early on around we have, a super capable organization. We believe some of the best talent in this industry and across industries. How do we really ensure the ownership of our sort of leadership groups in terms of how they manage flexibilities within their teams? So this was a sort of a big sort of what's our anchor? And then I think, as you see here, the key thing around role modeling is it has to start at the top. For sure it does. I mean, we have to see our most senior leaders managing that, both in terms of how they work flexibly to get the job done and get to outcomes. And we're really focused, it's not new, right? But how do we ensure that we're focused on delivery and business results and outcomes for the organization, not about how much time somebody spends in the office? Having said that, I say we've really talked about it's a balance for colleagues around sort of office time and remotely, depending on the nature of their jobs, for sure. And as you see here, a big thing that we've been talking and learning about is around psychological safety. So psychological safety from a view of how do we ensure colleagues can express what works for them in the right way? And it's sort of an and discussion, because let's be clear, people have made adjustments to their lives based upon the ways they've worked over the past 2 years. When we think about sort of the fundamentals, things, childcare as one example. So how do we ensure that those are critical considerations? We look at things like inflation and cost and different considerations that people have. So that's been pretty huge for us, Kevin, for sure. But this view around positive reinforcement, encouragement, benefits, we've talked a lot about something we've, in not rocket science, but around anchor days. What are those forums? What are those opportunities where it does have value to be face-to-face, right? So when people are coming, it's purposeful. There's a purpose. It's not to come and sit quietly in an office. It is about coming with a view around connection, collaboration, innovation, whatever that might be. And this view, as you see at the bottom here, around a two-tier system is we do have colleagues who are in global roles who are remote and will continue to be remote. And if you've got a balance of people sitting together face-to-face or remotely on Teams or Zoom, how do you manage that, right? And how do you ensure people feel connected and belonging, and people feel that, am I visible, and does that have an impact in terms of how I'm perceived? That's been huge for us as an organization. So I'd say, Kevin, we're still learning as we go through.
Yeah, that last point about avoiding a two-tier system, those that are in the office more often versus those that are, let's say, remote mostly or all the time, has been something that's come up on these calls a lot. And I4CP members, just as a reminder, you have access to a very rich tool that we created, our proximity bias checklist, which took an earlier checklist we created for hybrid work overall and really focused it in on what we're calling proximity bias. Those that are closest to leaders in the office, maybe a bias in their favor for promotions or lateral moves or development opportunities, mentoring, coaching, and so on. And obviously you want to avoid that to have a more equitable workplace. So yeah, I4CP members have access to that pretty rigorous tool that we've created, and it's definitely been a topic that we've discussed a lot. Richard, I wanted to ask you a question that Yolanda posted in the chat. You touched on it a little bit here around sort of some of the benefits of coming into the office, but she asked, what benefits or are you offering special incentives to employees to get them into the office for collaboration purposes, and so on. I think it's probably a mix of, you've been stressing managers, having the discretion to do so. So if it's truly needed for the activity or the event or the purpose of the day, it's not so much around incentives. It's just that's what needs to happen for that day or that week.
Right.
But otherwise, are you finding you're having to use incentives or not so much?
In places, yes, Tom, we are. I mean, to your point, the benefits of coming into the office around how work gets done has been sort of a critical focus for us. And as we think about some of the sort of outcomes that we're driving to as a team, I have to say as well, I mean, and you guys will probably, I'm sure, know better than me, but this view around sort of engagement, and how, when people are connected and there is an element of face-to-face, that does have an impact. And we have seen that and experienced it in Mondelēz. So that for sure, when we think about sort of a benefit and how colleagues are feeling about belonging within an organization, as I say, that's, we are working hard around how do we foster that when people are truly remote, and, again, that balance between in person versus working remotely. And from an incentive perspective, yeah, there have been some, if I give one great example, I think you learn a lot from tech companies, right? Where we are in Fulton Market, Chicago, Google's just down the road. I think Google are sort of pioneers around sort of investments in office and sort of cool things that they do around enticing colleagues. And, we are learning. I would say there are cost considerations we have to be, conscious of too. In Fulton Market in Chicago, things like breakfast and lunch, we are providing food for colleagues and people love it. I mean, I can't, we recently conducted a pulse survey in terms of, hey, we've been back a couple of months in Chicago now. What do you like? What can we do better? And, it's the practical things that make the biggest difference. And regardless of seniority level, right? Some of our most senior and, entry level positions too. So I would say, that we heard a lot around, hey, the fact that, there's breakfast options for us that are provided by the company and lunch options. That's huge because actually I have commute costs, and that means I can actually and also my chance to connect with colleagues over lunch, in the office in an open space. So that for sure. We all, from a what can we do better and different, parking. Honestly, parking has been a biggie where people say, hey, you're in the city and how are you going to support us? And that's a bit more difficult than we want it to be. So again, what are our options there? So I'd say, Tom, these are, some of the practical things we've seen are most important to colleagues around, getting back, and how can we remove as many barriers as possible in terms of facilitating that for people. It doesn't mean we can, do everything and anything. We can't. There are a lot of considerations, and all our and I'm sure everyone on this call will align with that. Cost is a critical consideration now with inflation and impact. But again, where do we want to invest because we see the benefit of that over time? Yeah.
One other thing I just wanted to surface from the chat, there's some good discussion going about the different terms hybrid and flexible. And I wanted to use that as a opportunity to ask you about your frontline workers, your on-site workers. I know in talking with you, that's not an area where you oversee a lot of the practices, but hybrid usually it means some mix of location where you work, in on-site versus at home or at a coffee shop, otherwise remote. Whereas flexible is sort of the broader concept where location flexibility, hybrid, is one aspect of it, but also day of week, time of day, flexible benefits, other type flexible, timings and so on can all come into play as well. So I'm just curious what you could share, maybe just briefly, about for your frontline workers where hybrid location flexibility really isn't an option.
Yeah, and for sure, Tom, it is more limited because if I take sort of manufacturing roles and your sort of production line, and as we think about demand in places like the US, having people on site is absolutely critical, and that, if I say, has only increased, in recent times, for sure. One thing, I mean, a huge emphasis for us globally in the spaces of supply chain is around capability and capability building. We're investing a lot as we talk about things like integrated Lean Six Sigma and how we're skill building, which gives colleagues more and different types of opportunities and the way they can then flex work. So that's something that we are investing in hugely. There's other elements when we look at sort of, on the front line. Of course, frontline is about being with customers. It's about being in store. But again, in between those times, again, the kinds of flexibility we're giving I would say, as I was talking to a North America colleague who was sort of, partnering this space, there's a lot of flexibility we're already giving. How do we continue to sort of support and enforce that and encourage and promote that, I should say, in terms of continued flexibility? We are looking in a few areas as well around digital and technology. So we made a huge investment in the space of HR and Workday back in 2019. And how do our colleagues benefit on the front line with some of that technology? Because at the moment it's a bit difficult for them, but they all have technology in the sales space, handheld devices in terms of how they're communicating with customers, and how can we leverage that technology in terms of their employee experience? And are there other options around flexibility we can look into? So I think more to come, Tom, and actually we are learning from others in calls like this as well around what else can we be doing.
Well, let's build on that support a little bit, Richard. I know that you've put out some tools there for both employees but especially to your managers to enable hybrid work or flexible work to happen. Tell us a little bit more about some of those tools.
Yeah, I mean, it's fairly simple stuff, I'd say, Kevin, but with this sort of huge emphasis on how do we support line leaders, we've been actually workshopping over the last, I would say, year or more, having dialogue with our managers around a few things around critical about setting context. So context around, what flexibility looks like at Mondelēz, how does hybrid sort of fit into that? Because it is important that our managers understand why we're making these choices, right? Because many have different views in terms of, hey, wanting colleagues to be face-to-face, wanting their team to be present versus, and some of the struggles with flexibility and working remotely. So we've had we've put a lot of emphasis on having dialogue, workshopping, setting context, and people understanding the external environment. Second, I would say is we pull together a number of guides. And again, there's nothing I'd say confidential in those guides that we could share, Kevin, if that was helpful for any others, but really then given some tools that would help, managers have the discussion. So it's quite simple stuff, but within those guides, facilitation tools as part of those, which managers we want managers to use. So in those workshops we're walking through those guides and those tools and the kinds of questions that can help them get to sort of the right contracting with their teams. So those are the kind of things, Kevin, that we've been looking at globally over the last, I'd say, 1 year. And again, we can share more of that as it's helpful.
Appreciate that. Well, this is and thanks for bringing this slide up. If it's Tom or Zeta, I'm not sure who's running this slide. I know we also talked about this in the prep calls, Richard, but a focus on mental health and just holistic well-being is something many companies have certainly amped up their efforts on. And I'm wondering how you've looked at that overall. I know you've looked at holistic well-being, but specifically mental and emotional health areas. So tell us a little bit about your efforts there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what you see in front of you is sort of a platform and a program we sort of feel very proud of globally. So actually, it was last year in 2021, we launched The Right You, which is our global platform for well-being, so holistic colleague well-being. And I've got to say, I mean, the power of sort of being in a global enterprise and seeing great practice in our markets, it was actually our Australia business that, I think we'd all been, globally, regionally, locally, looking at various different initiatives to support colleagues around sort of mental well-being and physical well-being. And again, aligning a view that, it's an expectation, right, of the role that corporations play as we think about our roles around sort of the welfare and well-being of our people. So many of our businesses were, had great practices locally. And our view was, how do we ensure that we can give our colleagues globally the same opportunities? So the Right You was sort of born in Australia. It started traveling around sort of Asia, Middle East, Africa. And then we scaled it globally around these sort of 3 pillars: mind, body, and connection. And within that, we also launched an app. So again, trying to leverage technology and digital, which gives colleagues basically access to all of their resources locally. Because again, in our company, and it might be true in others, there's a lot that exists that people just don't necessarily know how to access. So, this was a big part of making sure that colleagues feel they could sort of access information, and some simple examples. What we've done is ensure that all our colleagues globally have access to employee assistance programs. That was a stance Paulette Alviti, our Chief Human Resources Officer, is super passionate about. So that is something now we're super proud of that's in place across our enterprise, across, for manufacturing, sales, office colleagues, they have access to employee assistance programs where, again, there is, coaching and there's support around topics around mind and body. So that's one example of some of the work that we've done, Kevin. And then I would say, we've learned from many of our business units where these are employee-led initiatives. And of course, HR plays a huge role in facilitating, but one example in our Northern Europe UK business, which is one of our biggest business units, they launched a program called Boost, which was really focused on mental health and mental well-being. And that was actually initiated by colleagues that had had struggles with mental health and wanted to share their experience. And I'm really, I think bold and brave, and if I say putting themselves out there, sharing those experiences for others to learn from, and sort of this view around breaking stigma was sort of huge. And again, how do we learn from that globally? And these calls, they were running in Northern Europe. You'd have, between 500 and 700, people and lines connected, which is just huge. And for us, the right U is really around how do we make this a colleague movement, that it's not sort of a platform that we're struggling to sort of keep alive. But yes, there's definitely global facilitation, and there's things globally that we drive, and we must do that. And EAP is one small example. But how do we ensure that colleagues feel empowered locally to do things that make a difference locally? So I'd say that. And then final comment I would make, Kevin, is we are running things like well-being weeks. So we have sort of weeks dedicated across the year, which is really about providing tools, support, webinars, some outside in, external as well as internal. And in the space of mind, it's things around, colleagues come to hear from, external partners around, finance and financial planning is one example, hearing about sleep and well-being, and again, the impact that sleep has in terms of how we feel and being at our best. This view around, life and work is merged hugely. How do you switch off, and how do you best use technology? Some, hints and tips. So yeah, there are a few examples, Kevin, of some of the work we've been focusing on.
Yeah, those are all great examples. I've got a quick video here that I want to play for everyone about the Right You initiative. But before I do that and give your voice a rest for a couple minutes, I wanted to hit on that mental illness, mental health stigma aspect again, because you are such a global organization. When you and I were talking to prep for today, you noted that you're seeing some real progress with this initiative in Europe, in Asia. I mean, all around the world, mental health at some point has had a pretty heavy stigma attached to it, mental illness and mental health. I think some areas have matured and progressed beyond that, and it's become lessened, but I know it's still pretty high in some areas. So what are you seeing globally with what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's well said, Tom, that I think it's about us corporately being really clear around the messages we send across our enterprise, that we all have struggles with mental health in different ways. And what colleagues bring to work is not necessarily, fully, we want people to bring their full selves to work. We often don't know what's going on, behind, and how do we ensure that, we support, in a truly sort of holistic way. So I'd say we've done a lot of work just making sure we can create space and time, simple things as well around global town halls, our CEO talking about mental health, giving our most senior leaders giving examples of where they've struggled. So these are some of the things I'd say, Tom, that are definitely making a difference, because it does break the stigma. It's something that many people over the course of their lives will have, challenges with. And I think, yeah, we've been just very deliberate, I would say. And actually, the Right You was launched as part of our Purpose Day. So we talk about sort of being sort of our founding day at Mondelēz, and that shows the significance to us around how important this initiative is.
Well, very good. Like I said, you shared this video. I've seen it. I was pretty impressed. After we play the video, Zeta will share the YouTube link because it is publicly available. So we'll share that in the chat here in just a moment in case you want to share that with other colleagues at your organization. I think I've gotten past the couple seconds of advertisement at the beginning. I've got my audio sharing here. So I think if I play this, you all should be able to see it pretty well with audio. Bear with us, of course. I'm on hardline Ethernet, so as good bandwidth as you could really have in this day and age, but hopefully it'll play well for everyone. Here we go.
Our purpose is to empower people to snack right. This includes looking after the well-being of our consumers, communities, and most importantly, our colleagues. Given the many challenges we face in today's world, it's clear the time is now to prioritize our holistic well-being. We're proud to launch The Right You, the global brand name and movement for the way we support the well-being of our people around the world. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to well-being. It's personal, and it's up to each one of us to determine what's right for our individual lives. The Right You empowers Team MDLZ to thrive at work and at home across 3 core pillars: mind, body, and connection. The mind is our strongest muscle and requires proper care and training to be at our best. This pillar is all about enabling mind health to help you thrive and covers topics such as mental health, resiliency and resourcefulness, emotional balance and harmony, and financial health. Our bodies are complex and need proper attention to function well. Occupational health, personal health and healthy habits, including fitness, nutrition, and sleep, and preventative health are the areas of focus in this pillar centered around helping you achieve sustained physical well-being. And last but not least, as humans, we're wired for connection with self and others. In this pillar, you'll find resources that cover personal and professional social interactions, community involvement, hybrid and flexible work, and technology and digital connections. A main element of this program is the launch of the new Right You app, a one-stop shop where colleagues can access locally relevant well-being information, programs, and resources. We look forward to learning along the way as we grow our app and overall program to support your well-being journey. This is The Right You.
It's a nice video. And Richard, I was going to ask this question earlier. That app that that was just mentioned at the end of the video that you mentioned earlier, was that something that was completely internally developed, or was that somehow an external app?
Yes, okay. Completely internally, Kevin. Again, which we feel great about in terms of sort of our digital teams being involved in the creation and the support and making sure we're investing our resource behind this really strategic topic. So yeah, it was our own teams.
Got it.
The other one I was going to quickly call, Kevin, if I could, just another area we're looking to pilot and experiment, again, as it comes to technology and well-being, is Viva Insights with Microsoft, that some of you will be aware of, that sort of Microsoft has this capability. We are sort of clear as well. I mean, this is, I suppose, Microsoft pushing back data in the form of insights to individuals, right? It's personal data going back just to the individual, so it's maintained confidentially because it's the data for the person only. But yes, we're actually looking. We did a pilot in Brazil last year, and again, the emphasis really came from how can we help colleagues with insights data that can help them look at their working habits. And there's some simple things in there, but some great things just around focus time. Who are you connecting with? There's some great links to sort of, mindfulness and resources. Gives you prompts around certain follow-ups that you can close out. So we launched it in Brazil. We got some really great feedback, or piloted in Brazil, got some great feedback. So we are looking globally. Sort of our next stop, if I say that, is sort of EMEA and North America. In the coming weeks, we're going to sort of switch on that technology. And again, this is part of on its own. It's never enough, right? But as part of a sort of holistic program and offering, these are some of the things that we are sort of taking forward and looking at too.
It's very interesting that you're piloting and looking to use the Microsoft Viva platform. Microsoft, as they do with it, pretty much everything they do, sort of made a big splash with the announcement of that. I think it was last year, or maybe it was even 2 years ago now. But like anything big in enterprise like that, it takes a while for it to gain traction. So great to hear that a big company like Mondelēz is giving it a go. To Kevin's question around your mobile app, we actually did have our one poll question for today. So Zeta, if you could bring that up for folks. Just curious who else on the call. Let's see, that is not today's poll.
Oh, well, we can answer that one.
Let's see. I think I got it here. Here we go. Yeah, so it should be up now. So it's basically what Kevin was asking. Do you have a mobile app? And if so, did you develop it yourself, or did you develop it with a third? Is there leveraging something from a third party? So please, everyone on the call, give us your answer to this. We're just curious to see, because we have heard of other organizations doing something like this. They're either rolling out new wellness, well-being apps. Maybe some organizations also rolling out diversity, equity, and inclusion apps. We use one at internally at I4CP, actually, called Everyday Inclusion. So a lot of these apps are something that more and more organizations are using for various areas of their human capital business. All right, I think the answers are sort of done trickling in, so I'm going to go ahead and share the results. And interesting that third-party apps, for those of you that said, yes, we are using one, third party definitely far more often than developing your own. So interesting, Richard, that in your case, you all developed your own, and I know you're very proud of it. Definitely not in the majority there, at least for folks on this call.
Yeah, but I was going to say there is some third party we do too, but in different spaces. But yeah, some good insights there, Tom.
Yeah, and then a good group, 17% also still considering having such an app as well. So I think it's going to be a trend. I think more and more organizations are going to do this as part of their overall employee experience and employee value prop.
Richard, I'm just curious from a manager perspective. I've often, I've had this conversation with several people, but I've thought this for a while. It wasn't that long ago that managers were basically encouraged to stay away from talking about, mental and emotional well-being issues with employees, right? Just don't go there. And now we're encouraging them to do so, but it can be an awkward conversation. And I'm just wondering, how your training managers are encouraging them to have that conversation.
Yeah, it's a great point, Kevin. I mean, in a few ways, again, just, examples through these sort of well-being weeks where managers have opportunities to sort of step in and learn, right? So both for themselves and for their teams, and sort of by attending a number of these sort of, programs and offerings, they will get sort of prompts and cues around sort of how to manage conversations. And I would say, I mean, this is where, the HR team still plays a really critical space. And yeah, that if there's difficult discussions to have and managers are not feeling confident, they must come and talk to a HR partner. I mean, we have to sort of, emphasize that point. But in terms of, again, some simple things and models, Kevin, we're using as well. I mean, one we, talk about quite frequently is something like see, hear, speak, right? And really then understand before we you jump into a topic around work, right? Are we really understanding where someone's at? And it's not a question of, hey, how's your mental health today? No, but how are you? What's going on? And how can I support you? And are there any challenges you're facing? And again, how we ensure, manage, if I say it this way, we are, asking a lot of our managers, right, in many, many different ways. So we need to support them so they feel comfortable and confident. So yeah, it's a big focus for us for sure. Yeah.
I'd like to point out there in the chat, a few of you were sharing some of the other well-being or otherwise new apps that you're using in your organizations. And Denise asked the question if others on the call could share as well. So I'd love to see more examples shared over in the chat. Last question I sort of had on this topic, Richard, and then we've got two others that we'll get to here before the end of our hour. What sort of uptake have you seen for the app, as well as what we're seeing here today on the screen, Purpose Day, the Healthy Habits Challenge? What's been the response from employees to these things?
Yeah, and it's still relatively new for us, Tom, and we launched, it was last September, the app. So what we've sort of seen and learned is it's important to have, if I say significant, if I put sort of events that sort of push people, that then people sort of see it and explore. So this was one example in front around sort of, Healthy Habits Challenge, which again, our global region business units really sort of pushed. How can you, and sort of one aspect we're sort of doing more and more of is how can you bring these sort of initiatives into team conversations and how we sort of push that down and flow into the organization. So I'd say, Tom, the response is positive, but there's huge opportunity. I mean, there's a lot of people who are not going in. So there's people who are not tapping into the resources. But when we launched the Right You, it was, hey, this will be, a journey for us. And we're going to learn as we sort of go along. What I would say is, though, people are hugely engaged on the ground in local initiatives. So one of the big sort of aspects around the Right You was people are connecting what they're already involved in to, hey, this is well-being, and this is part of our global corporate, and investments that we're making. So even if they're not going necessarily into the app, how are you participating locally, and how do you link that back into the Right You? So that's some of our focus too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, after all, life is local, right? I mean, our personal lives, our business lives, everything gets integrated for each individual at the local level. So not surprising to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, Tom, I think another topic we wanted to get into was just automation and digitization in general. And obviously, Mondelēz, has been using various degrees of automation in its business, on the manufacturing side, product development side. But we're curious about HR and how you're looking at that, Richard. I know we talked a little bit about onboarding in your India operation. So
yes,
tell us a bit about what we're seeing here on the screen.
Yeah, and this is, I'd say, Kevin, a cool pilot that we're sort of exploring in our India business. And we were, I think really proud to sort of get sort of a real message out around how we're sort of embracing technology and digital and to improve employee experience. What are we doing from a HR perspective? To your point, there's a lot globally in the space of digital. I mean, just, we Mondelēz in prior years have relied quite heavily on partners in the space of digital and sort of outsource, whereas now we're really focused on how do we build and bring that capability in-house. Is a huge focus for us, in particular our digital team. So just to make that point, and this is an example of it in HR. So this is a pilot, as you say, it's really new. You see there was a number of news articles that went out. For those that you are on LinkedIn and follow Mondelēz, you may have sort of seen some of this too. And this is Shilpa. She is our people lead, vice president of head of HR at Mondelēz India. India is a huge business for us. I mean, Cadbury's been established in India for many, many years. So we have a huge recognition and employer brand in India. And I think there's a lot of experimentation and innovation the India business unit lead on, which the rest of us learn from. And this is one example. So it's a small pilot, Kevin, which is, again, using virtual reality and sort of immersive experience where new onboardees coming into Mondelēz experience different parts of our business remotely, virtually. So it's not about going into necessarily our R&D center, our tech center, or the plant, but you actually learn more about our end-to-end operation in the virtual world. So, we've had some really good, examples of sort of leadership meetings where people are in different places and you come into sort of a common digital room together, sort of virtually, and you're looking at dashboards and data real time. And this was an experiment which, is sort of this, again, it's, immersion, the simulated environment with sort of digital content. And I think it's about giving colleagues a different kind of experience, and we'll learn from it. And then, where we see success, we'll scale it. But we have an innovation team within digital that is sort of at the fore of this. And a lot of, and there's a lot of work we're piloting around areas such as sort of immersive learning, capability, what can we do around on-job training, in certain areas like R&D, sort of remote assistance. So again, it's new, but we're piloting in a lot of areas through our sort of innovation digital team.
Regarding the onboarding using the VR and digital technologies in India, it'll be very interesting. I know it's a pilot, but it'll be very interesting for you to get some measurements and metrics on, does that have an impact on how many of those employees stay with the firm? It's
Absolutely.
Very expensive to hire and onboard new employees, and there's usually a quit rate that's established in any company within the first 6 months or first year. And it'll be very interesting to see if you can compare that rate for those that went through this program, this pilot, versus others, particularly in India, if you can do a true A/B test, but even globally, even with some of the confounders that would appear there.
Great point, Tom. Absolutely. And I know the India team are looking at that, and that'll be part of, do we see, we're investing here and what are the benefits, right? Because the technology can look cool, but what is the real impact? So we definitely need to sort of understand that. I have to say, though, it does create a buzz. And from an employer branding perspective, it creates a nice buzz about the organization of what are we investing in, and technology being at the fore, and how do we attract talent. So
yeah, absolutely. Particularly, I'm sure for the younger generations, millennials and Gen Z, most of all. I want to call attention also for everyone on the call, because it was a public call as part of our Next Practice Monthly series. We had one of our talent and learning calls with the heads of talent at Accenture just a couple of months ago. And I donned the headset and went into a virtual reality world. They too are using it first and foremost for onboarding, although they've already expanded at Accenture to use it for training and some other purposes internally as well. They've made a massive investment in this. And we recorded that call as part of our Next Practices Monthly series. So I believe it was the March call. If you go out to i4cb.com and go to the events area and look at the past webinars, you'll be able to find that. And the recording recorded, my face in the Zoom window with my equipment on, but then you were seeing my avatar and the 2 or 3 folks from Accenture that we had on going around that virtual environment and sort of exploring it. So while you're seeing it in a recorded format, you really do get a sense for what that experience is like. So I'd encourage everyone on the call, go back and watch that archived call if you would.
I think I was the only one without a headset on in that call, and I can attest that Tom did not fall out of his chair.
Right.
The rumors around that are very untrue.
Very good. We had one last topic that we've been bringing up with guests recently, Richard, and that's the Ukraine and what Mondelēz is doing there. So would love to hear a little bit about all the things that you'd like to share about what you're doing in support of both workers, contractors, anything you'd like to share about the Ukraine.
Yeah, certainly, Tom. So we do have a big business in Ukraine. So our number one priority has been around sort of safety and protecting our people. So there's been a huge amount of work, that has been sort of supported, particularly from our MEU, which is our Mondelēz European Union, our European business, that has been really prioritizing their focus, resource, investment on protecting people and supporting our colleagues. So it's been a huge focus, and I think we've all been seeing the devastating impact of war, and we've seen the direct impact on our colleagues. So there's definitely sort of multiple examples from a people perspective, and I say with that view around number one priority being around safety. I said we have colleagues in terms of office as well as manufacturing. So Ukraine has been for us again an important business in terms of serving the consumers of Ukraine, but other parts of Europe and the globe as well. A couple of examples I definitely want to share is around supporting colleagues, if I say, get to safety, examples I think we've heard from other organizations around, colleagues sort of reaching the border, making sure we're there to support around transportation, housing, shelter, work opportunities, visa implications, that has been sort of a huge focus for us, for our European business. And one sort of specific example I give is that many of our colleagues said our global colleagues, they want to help more. What more can we do? So there's a lot sort of globally in terms of, funding. Colleagues donated as well, and Mondelēz matched that. But how can I directly support beyond sort of financial? And one example of that was a tool and app that we created, our digital team created actually in a space of, it was a few days, it was 4 days actually, called Be My Guest. And this was really supporting around temporary housing issues for Mondelēz Ukrainian employees. So it was sort of, how can we support in sort of a simple but really effective way? And this was sort of the intent of this, really was for our Ukrainian colleagues, sort of, and their families as sort of the guests, to find temporary housing solutions, sort of, at the earliest points as they sort of, escape from war in the Ukraine. And again, it gave Mondelēz colleagues, in terms of hosts, the opportunity to offer housing solutions. And I have to say, in a matter of just a few days, we had over 130 colleagues, over 20 countries, offering over 230 beds, rooms to support Ukrainian colleagues and their families. And accommodations were available from shorter stints, say 2 weeks, to a few months. We saw in a very short period of time that right matches within a few days, sort of 45 plus beds matching sort of, guest and host together. So we're really proud of our employees because this is our colleagues wanting to support and really wanting to do the right thing. So there's a lot corporately, globally, within the region, and then our colleagues directly. But how could we facilitate that? And that was through some of this technology and facilitating this process as well. What we also have done, Tom, just to call out, is around, again, EAP service, counseling support, educating our talent acquisition teams around prioritizing Ukrainian colleagues for roles and how we facilitate that. So that has been huge for us. And there's many colleagues in Ukraine who continue to be in Ukraine, obviously in safe spaces. So what's the kind of support that we're giving has been sort of a huge focus for us.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Obviously the human side of it and the many ways you're rallying to support all of your employees there. But also just from an agility perspective, being able to get the IT team to perhaps drop what they were working on otherwise and rally to create an app like that has, those numbers were pretty impressive. A, how quickly it was done, but then B, just how many people were impacted by it in the hundreds being able to use that app. So that's impressive.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, we're really proud of our teams. I mean, it has been, how do we divert resource to what is most critical? And as we said, sort of safety of our people is the number one priority. So with that sort of spirit and focus, absolutely, our tech teams, made it a priority, and they were given the space to make it a priority. And then what is even more sort of, humbling is that our colleagues wanted to make a difference. So that's just been, phenomenal. Yeah.
Well, Richard, we're just about out of time, and I want to make sure I take the time to thank you for joining us. This has been a great conversation, covered a lot of different areas. So thanks for sharing what you've shared. I'm just such a big fan of your organization, as are many people inside of I4CP. We've just loved our partnership with Mondelēz.
Thanks, Kevin. No, I know it is a great partnership, and yeah, huge thanks to you and Tom. Again, I've really enjoyed the conversation and love learning from others in these discussions, and the research material you have, it makes a huge difference. So thanks to you guys as well.
Well, thank you, Richard. And I echo Kevin's comments about both the conversation today and our partnership with Mondelēz as a member of I4CP. I'll just close things out by reminding everyone that we do have this meeting every other Tuesday, same time, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. So join us on June 23rd for our next meeting in this series. And as we mentioned earlier, please do register also for the webinar on June 29th, where we'll be partnering with a high-level executive at Fortune. Kevin will to be co-presenting that webinar on our new study, The Talent Imperative, which was done in partnership with them. So hope to see you both on the 23rd for the next call in this series and at the webinar on the 29th. So thanks everyone for participating. Great chat, great conversation with you, Richard. Always good to work with you, Kevin, and we'll see you again very soon, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks again,
Thanks
Richard.
all. Yeah, thanks to you. Thanks all.